Welcome everybody to this session on data governance for a digitally enabled state of the Government Aftershock Conference of the OECD. I am really pleased to have you participate in this session today. And to start, I'd like to share with you some information on what has been happening yesterday. We've been having over 60 events in 17 countries around the world, which gathered over 4,000 people. Some of the keywords that emerged in the conversation around the world have been focusing on the necessity to foster learning, experimentation, and creativity in our public sectors, the urgent need to focus on transformation, change to strengthen resilience of our governments, and the need to be more agile, people-oriented, and collaborative. Now, this seems to be characterizing a new reality, but if I think about those words, I do see that many of those are challenges and priorities that we've been dealing with for quite a few years. So the key question is, can data and a better use of data help address some of these challenges and create some of these conditions that would make our governments more resilient in the sense of capable to come up with better responses for the needs of our economies and societies, to design recovery strategies which are long-term sustainable and part of broader public sector reforms. Were our governments, our societies, and our economies ready and competent to use data in the appropriate way? What have we learned from the first wave as we enter a winter that seemingly will be pretty long and facing us with the second wave of the pandemic? The panel today will focus on things that we've learned and how can we bring these lessons into actions that occupy and will occupy our agendas in the months to come. What do we want to leave behind? What do we want to keep from what we've been doing? And what do we want to do differently to realize the full potential of data as a key asset to come up with the best responses? These are responses that cannot be designed or implemented only by governments. We need to have the whole ecosystem that brings together the different powers of the state, representatives from the economy and from the society, from the academic world, come together and try to identify the best answers to these questions, which is why I'm extremely honored and happy to be able to welcome the distinguished panelists that will join our session today. All of them are friends, so they are not only experts in this domain, but people with whom I've been working for a few years. Starting with Mr. Cheow Hoe, who is the Deputy Chief Executive of the Government Technology Agency in Singapore. Ms. Julia Glidden, who's Corporate Vice President, Worldwide Public Sector at Microsoft Corporation. Ms. Paula Forteza, who's Member of Parliament, French National Assembly in France. Mr. Stefaan Verhulst, who was the co-founder of the GovLab at NYU in New York. And Ms. Sue Bateman, who's the Head of Innovation and Policy Team within the Government Digital Services in the United Kingdom. We encourage all of you participants to be involved in this session. You have the discussion module on the right-hand side of your screen where you can post questions or you can post comments, and we really invite all of you to be very active and identify questions you'd like the panel to answer at the end. We will also run a poll that the team will be placing now on the OPSI platform. The poll will focus on the following question. In view of what has been seen during the crisis, what should governments prioritize to achieve a data-driven public sector? You can choose 4 options among the following ones. Formulate a clear strategic vision to leverage data as a key strategic asset. Secure the right leadership for data policies. Support public sector organizations in fulfilling new data-related requirements, update the current legal and regulatory framework for accessing and sharing data, strengthen the ethical use of data and algorithms, improve data life cycle management, build sound, scalable public sector data infrastructures, reinforce the security of strategic public sector data infrastructure, and foster new types of partnerships and programs around data access, sharing, and use. You will have the time through the entire panel discussion to complete the poll, and we will share back with you at the end of the session the key results to the poll question. So without further delay, I'd like to ask the panelists, help me address a key question that has been keeping us busy in the past few weeks. Considering your experience, what could have been done differently by governments to better realize the full potential of a data as key asset during the COVID-19 pandemic? And I'd like Julia to take this question first.
Sorry. Thanks, Barbara. And it is really great to be with you and colleagues from around the world. I really appreciate the OECD for bringing us all together on this important topic. You know, it occurred to me as we were talking before we went live about how we've all been traveling around the world and now virtually together in Zooms and Teams meetings discussing these topics. And it seems for years we've always talked about what government can do better. And I think I'm going to start the panel with my own experience in the trenches running Microsoft's worldwide response to the pandemic for public sector agencies and celebrate, because I'm truly humbled by what I saw governments around the world do. And I would say, as I said in my discussion with the UN, that, you know, in the darkest hour when the world needed technology to harness the power of data, to leverage the insights from data, technology delivered and governments were ready and moved at a rapid rate. Our CEO has said he saw more digital transformation in 2 months than in 2 years. But I think those of us in public sector can truly say we saw more transformation in 2 months than in 20 years, as governments rapidly harness the power of data to understand where health hotspots were, where medical supplies were needed, where first responders needed to be deployed. And now we're seeing a rapid shift with the great news about vaccines, bringing the public and private sector, the third sector, research institutions together to unleash healthcare innovation at an unprecedented rate. And I'm now seeing it go into gear as we're working together for vaccine distribution and management. So I know there's a lot we can talk about what we could do better. We have all talked about, thank goodness, we all put so much in, all the digital evangelists around this table and around the world to put the infrastructure in place. But I do want to start on a celebratory note, because I do think I saw more collaboration, more embrace, more use of data in those 2 months of the crisis and the subsequent, what was unthinkable now, 8 months of the crisis, that should give us all cause for hope and cause for celebration, whilst I know there's still much work to be done.
Thank you, Julia. It's certainly very reassuring to have a celebratory note. I was in a panel conversation yesterday and the word uncertainty was coming up so much that I think having a positive side to begin with, it's very reassuring. And with this, I'd like to ask Cheow Hoe, from the Singaporean perspective, what do you think the government or governments in general could have done differently to leverage data as a key asset?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. It's great to hear that, there's some light at the end of the tunnel, and I think we're all positive the fact that that it could get better. But when the crisis first started, probably like about February or March this year, there was pandemonium. I mean, most of us did not know what to do, and the reality is that we were all struggling to figure out what's the best way to control the pandemic. And as Julia said, there are like probably 20 different things that we can focus on. But one thing we realized that was quite important was contact tracing. Now, I think many of us know that the virus is very infectious, and it infects people in a geometric progression, meaning that, if a person gets it, within a day, probably another 5 to 8 people get it, and it goes on, and the tree kind of like just multiplies. That was a very scary thing. And when we first started with manual contact tracing, it was difficult. It took us probably like about 5 days or 6 days to really get credible data to be able to figure out where the network was forming or the chain of transmissions happening. And then, everybody said, look, the only way to stop this is to have a more efficient way of contact tracing. So my team went out there. They created this app called Trace Together in 4 weeks. So you see, all of a sudden, government don't talk about months anymore. People are talking about weeks. And we have shown it's possible. Government can do things in weeks, not in months or years, basically. When we created the app, we were quite shocked how much data we could pull in to be able to do a much better job of contact tracing. And today I'm in Singapore. out of the population of 5.5 million, about 2.7 million people have the app on their phone. But we realized that there's a bunch of people, older people, younger people, who don't have a phone or can't use a phone effectively. So we created also a token that runs the same protocol. So now, basically, we have another public about close to about 800,000 people with a token. And basically, we have reached about 60% of the population carrying some contact tracing device that allows us to very quickly contact trace any positive cases. And the good thing is that the contact tracing cycle has gone from like 5 to 6 days to less than 2 days. It's now about 1.2 days. Imagine that, right? All of a sudden, instead of a chain of transmission that hits hundreds of people, you basically can kill the chain of transmission within a day and quarantine all those people that were infected. And I think that's a beautiful thing about it. But the key thing is this: it needs pervasiveness of data. You know, it's no more just about 10% of the population having it, because I did a BBC interview and I was telling them that we estimate that for contact tracing to work well, you need about 70% of people carrying a device or something that can get you there. I mean, you can calculate, you can do the math basically. We are now at about 60%, 50+%, and we are getting there. So I'm very proud of that. But the key thing is this: those data are not collected. They reside in the device of people, which means that data privacy is respected, which is very important. And more important of all is that the data is only downloaded when the person is positive, so-called COVID positive. And then those data are then associated with other people that we think that are within the proximity of the person. So data is important. Can we do more? I think so. We would have loved to have 100% of people having a device or somebody that can contact trace them. And the good news is that right now, Singapore is essentially COVID-free. We have zero transmission for like weeks already. The only kind of COVID cases we have are people that are coming into Singapore, and we isolate them anyway. So it does help. We have proven that it can be done. It shows that if you contact trace effectively, you can really cut the transmission chain very quickly. So, well, I'll start with that basically. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I like having another positive note, even from your intervention, which is, you know, what Singapore is experiencing gives hopes to the fact that that can be the reality also in other parts of the world. And I like the three things from what you said. First of all, governments can act faster than we all think they can. Second, the relevance of the data for, you know, we've been discussing so much about the track and tracing and heard so much about that. And I think not the right focus is on the conversation when we look at the track and tracing, the value of data, but also, as you said, the pervasiveness of the data, meaning the use of the app is an essential element to enable you guys to get the wealth of data and the critical mass of data that enables you to design policies. And this needs trust. This needs people, you know, to know that you're taking the right measures to secure privacy in the handling of the data, for example. So going to another side of the world, another government, what do you think is your take from your perspective from the UK?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to follow on from both comments from the private sector and from another government, because I guess in thinking about this, my reflection is that the pandemic is really touched every aspect of our lives, and I think that the thing for me, as somebody who's been working in and around the data field for a number of years now, is kind of not just the potential around data and innovation, but the fact that it is bound up in that personal experience. And maybe if I bring that to life a little bit by some of the work that I supported back when the pandemic first really hit the UK back in March time. And one of the services that the UK government digital service spun up in collaboration with a number of other departments, the wider public sector, so local authorities and the National Health Service, and in fact some industry partners, was a mobilisation around supporting about 2.2 million people who'd been identified as clinically extremely vulnerable and who needed shielding. And in order to be able to shield, we needed to provide statewide support, things like delivering food parcels or supermarket slots for priority deliveries, providing support via local authorities and healthcare. And I was involved at the end, kind of the front end of that work around putting in place the right kind of data sharing agreements. And you know, there are occasions in the normal run of business when those data sharing agreements can take months and months to do. But the imperative, given that this was a fairly large group of citizens who needed our support very quickly, it forced us really to take action, to think about the risk appetite that we might normally place under other circumstances. Of course, everything in accordance with data protection legislation, and we also applied our own data ethics framework in those considerations. But we were also in a position where, rather than taking months to do individual agreements, we'd done hundreds within the matter of weeks, and done it in a way that we were transparent about what we were doing. We involved the regulator in conversations just to get some check in there. So for me, it's a similar story, really. It's kind of the lessons that I'm taking from this back into my day job, really, around where there is that clear sense of purpose, where there are shared objectives, where there's a shared sense of imperative, and a clear understanding of the legislative, the security, and the ethical landscape, we can work at pace. And so for me, the lesson taking forward is not just what we do over the coming months in our continued efforts against the pandemic, but also how do we recognise that step change that's really come about, as Julia kind of said, around how governments have mobilised and started, you know, really kick-started that digital transformation, and how do we bake that into a new benchmark, I guess, would be the thing that I'm taking from it.
Thank you, Sue. Positive note again of the fact that the government was able to act fast and join the different pieces, because I think you underlined a very key point that the pandemic brought up a crisis that was not only a health crisis. We talk so much at the OECD about the role of governments in continuing providing essential goods, but I like, from our perspective, also to put on the table the delivery of essential services, which are not only health related. And I very strongly agree with you that having a shared purpose is as important as having a shared platform that enables you to use the data appropriately. And Paula, we heard the role of not only legislations, but also the legislative powers, especially in trying to help keep the balance between doing things fast and remembering that there are some conditions around respecting rights, ethical decisions behind the use of data and technology are at the core of the conversation that keep you busy all the time. So what's your take in terms of what could have been done differently from governments in this context?
Thank you, Barbara, for this invitation, and as usual, congratulations for your work at the OECD. I think that the crisis in France revealed some barriers from the government in their capacity to use data and their capacity to work with civil society and to take upon the proposals, the concrete proposals that came up from civil society. And not necessarily technical barriers, but more cultural or even administrative barriers. I like to always look around the world and see what other countries have done. And I was very impressed by what happened in Taiwan. So the strategy that was led by Audrey Tang, which is the digital minister of Taiwan, and she summed up her strategy with 3 words, which was fast, fair, and fun. And in these 3 aspects, I think France could have done better. why did Taiwan, why was Taiwan able to act so fast? Because they were crowdsourcing indications and new ideas and projects from civil society. In France, for instance, we saw that it took a lot of time for the administration to release open data on health issues. And we had civil society that was already scrapping from PDF documents or opening up and sharing this kind of data before the administration of the government. We have also the administration had difficulties to define, for instance, accurate perimeters for the curfew, and we had civil society that was working with OpenStreetMap, crowdsourced data, and that very quickly could deploy lots of maps and different cartographies of, for instance, where the stores were open, where to get masks, where to get tested, etc. So we've seen that civil society went faster than the administration, and the administration had a blockage to really take upon these projects. For instance, for the digital travel waivers, we had a lot of apps that were developed by civil society, and the Interior Ministry didn't want to make them valuable. And at the end, there were, because the citizens were taking up on these apps, the government was forced to recognize these waivers and to make them legal. So we see how the administration was always one step behind. So the second one was fair, and we see that in France we have trouble with that. In this moment, we only have 35% of French people that trust the French government to deal with the crisis. And I think a lot of this comes from the fact that there was not transparent data about what was happening. And so there were different information and contradictory information, and people were lost, didn't know who to trust, and now we are left with conspiracy theories that are taking upon with, for instance, a documentary that was released a couple of days ago, Hold Up, which is a conspiratory documentary explaining how the government created the COVID to go against freedom and liberties and etc. So, and this is going very fast on the social media and diffusing very fast on social media. And I think one of the reasons because why it's taking up so quickly, it's because we didn't have this shared information about exactly what's happening at different moments of the crisis. And the third concept then was fun, and this is something new, and I was very impressed by this approach. We always keep aside the idea that humor can be a tool for public policy, can be a tool to nudge some behaviors at some point. I don't know if you saw the German government has released, I think yesterday, a little video where they make a humorous comparison with a documentary from the Second World War, and they say how today youth will become the heroes of tomorrow, and they will tell their sons how they were the heroes just by staying in their couches and by doing nothing. And so it's very funny, and it's the idea is to make young people stay at home and respect sanitary sanitary rules, and so we see how humor and more in a moment where things are very anxious and tragic, it can be a very powerful tool. And we know also that to fight fake news, for instance, using humor can be much powerful, because virality around humor is more than around very serious sourced like kind of interventions. And so what we saw in France around this idea of fun is that although the communication and the debates around the Stop COVID application, which was our contact tracing application, were very very heavy, and were trying to distribute, like people were feeling guilty. We had a Secretary of State of Digital Affairs that said that if we were against this app, we would be responsible for the death of many people. So there was a vocabulary that was not fun at all. and I think this contributed to the fact that there was not trust in this app, and that there was no willingness to download the app and to use it. And we know today that the notification system didn't work. We have only 1% of the contact cases that can be traced countrywide, because we have very few people that downloaded the app, and so we don't have this effect, this wired effect that makes that people can so that we have enough data to understand who contacted who. And I think we could make this better by adding maybe a gamification aspect to the app. Like, for instance, telling people how much people did you cross in your day today, and maybe explain that you should try to minimize this at the maximum, and maybe do a little game around that, you know, with objectives, and try to minimize this, try to minimize that. And so I think that could be a way to reconnect with this third aspect of Audrey Tang's strategy, which is fun and humor.
Thank you. I really like a lot the fast, fair and fun slogan, which I didn't know of. So thank you for sharing with us this lens. And I agree with you that it's a matter of communication to build the trust, but it's also a matter of trying to make things digestible with some humor. So it's, in a way, it's the other side of how maximizing the impact of the track and tracing apps that Cheow was underlying, which is how can we make people feel that they can trust the use of the app, but also we can entice them to use the app in a way. And if I think about sense of purpose, reuse of open data, use of data and collaborations with the private sector and the civil society, you, Stefaan, obviously come to my mind, because I think that the work that at the GovLab you've been doing, not only for many years, but in particular in relation to the pandemic, to try to understand to what extent governments at the central and the local level were not only using data themselves, but like opening up data for others to do something with that, to respond to the crisis, has been really inspiring and extremely important. So can you share with us a little bit, having this overarching overview of what governments have been doing around the world? In your view, what could have been done differently?
Sure, and thanks so much, Barbara, for having me, and delighted to be on this panel. And it's kind of hard to follow everyone here who are obviously experts in their field. But I do like how Julia started off by actually focusing on naming and faming as opposed to the typical naming and shaming that quite often happens in this space. And I do believe that we actually do need to celebrate a lot of what has happened as well, despite the fact that, of course, there is a lot that can be improved upon, which is in any case, hopefully how one approaches this effort by actually learning from what we've been doing in order to be better prepared in the future. And so, yeah, indeed, as Barbara indicated, we have built an effort in order to understand what is actually happening in this space. And so I think we have probably the largest repository of examples on how government and the private sector and civil society have worked together. And I think there are a few elements that have emerged. And again, I only have 4 minutes, so I'm not gonna go too much into that, but I'm gonna focus specifically on the role of governments and how governments could, to a large extent, have improved somewhat their efforts in order to use data, but also have improved the way they engaged with others. And I think the central theme here is they could have improved the signal for which they needed help with. By which I mean is that when COVID-19 really emerged, there was a massive sense of uncertainty. And there was also a massive upspring of a willingness to help, but quite often there was no signal from the government on what they needed help with, and especially what data would be valuable for what questions. And so what we have been arguing is that government actually not only have to become sophisticated in using data, they have to become far more sophisticated in formulating questions for which data could be an answer. And so if government would, and this could be at the local level, it could be at the national level, but if they would engage in an internal and external effort to actually source the questions that matter and then build collaborative around those questions, you would have had a much faster probably insight. You would also have seen that actually the questions are far more sophisticated than just epidemiology. There are questions related with regard to how do you open up schools? How do you deal with the level of subsidy that one needs to provide in order to really secure a certain kind of economic security in society? How do you deal with misinformation around COVID-19? So there's a whole range of questions that could be served by engaging data holders and especially civil society in trying to come up with answers that could have been better if there would have been, for instance, a list of 100 questions that matter. And I think sourcing that kind of, not just the insight, but sourcing the questions around which you would like to secure insight, I think that would have been better. So that's one, and of course I can share some links here that might provide the audience also with a sense on what are the other questions that we have sourced. And those questions differ, by the way, across the life cycle of the pandemic, right? So it's not only the data life cycle that is important, it's also what questions do you want to have answered across the pandemic life cycle, which changes. And of course, if you have a second wave, then hopefully you're better prepared to actually answer some of those questions. The second element, I would argue, that also government could engage better is to really indeed have a broader conversation with the public around the reuse of the data. I mean, I totally agree with Paula that fun is a good way forward. And by the way, my son is totally committed to that German video to be a hero moving forward. But I think there's also very important to actually engage with the public around the use of data and the reuse of data. And so what we have been arguing is actually the creation of citizens' assemblies around the use of data during COVID-19. And so we held one here in New York City, which we called the Data Assembly. And it was very interesting to see that the public is very sophisticated. It's not a binary yes or no with regard to how they want government to use data. It depends. And I think having an understanding on what the public feels is important with regard to how you design a data strategy will establish more trust in the effort, and ultimately also will engage them more in becoming data providers when necessary. And I think having a clear demand, 100 questions, for instance, and have also an engagement with the public around the data and under what conditions they would feel it is appropriate to use data, I think that would have helped. And obviously it's not too late. There are many efforts towards that end that still can happen. So these would be like two immediate actions that can be taken as well.
Thank you, Stefan. I couldn't agree more that good data and right data to get to good answers requires good questions. So I really think that your initiative around the questions is very inspiring because it connects the practice and the value. So thank you very much. Now, we heard about the good experience in Singapore, the good experience you had with the track and tracing app and the importance of being able to use the data collected through the app to get better decisions. So I'd like to ask you a follow-up question, Cheow, concerning the data infrastructure and governance that you had in place in Singapore that helped you be able to use the data as a key strategic asset. Can you share with us a little bit of insights on that? Because we're all looking very closely at that example.
Barbara, thanks very much. You know, you're right about one thing, right? That the ability of the government to react, some governments, not all government, to this crisis is not because of what was done yesterday, but was done quite some time ago. In fact, yesterday I had a great panel with the CTO of New York City, John Paul Farmer, and Chris Ferguson from the UK, as well as Edward Hartwig from the USDS. And we were talking about the fact that we were lucky that many of our cities or country have built the critical infrastructure probably 5 to 7 years ago. Look at UK GDS, for example. If those infrastructure was not built, none of these things would happen. So I'll give you an example. In Singapore, I think for the data infrastructure, we first started this concept of what we call a government data architecture, whereby the most important thing was, how do we get good data, right? And when I mean good data, I'm talking about single sources of truth. The problem with government is that many departments and ministries and agencies collect data from everywhere. Data is horrible because they duplicate each other. And most of the time, you really don't know what is the source of truth in the first place. I mean, let's give a simple example, like an address. I'm sure the government probably have 20 different addresses from a person, but which is the real one, right? I think that's really the problem. And I think we spend many years cleaning up the data, designating what we call agencies to kind of take control of what we call a single source of truth, and then start creating what we call trusted centers where the data can be well preserved, maintained, and very importantly, fused when it's needed. I think that's really important because once you build that, it allows you to do a lot of things very, very quickly. The third thing that I think was very important was our ability to build easy way of exchanging data. Now, the weird thing about government is that to get one form of data from another agency takes forever. Why? Because you got to write into the agency, request for the data. Somebody's going to evaluate your request. Probably takes forever to come back to you. And then finally say, yes, you can get the data. And then they will send a service request to some vendor that will take 6 months to build you some secured FTP or something like that. By the time it's over, it's 1 year. So what we did was like about 4 years ago, we built this thing called Apex, which is a data exchange. It's basically a data gateway, whereby we were onboarding a lot of critical APIs onto this particular exchange. And this exchange really helped us a lot during the pandemic. When we need data to be pulled from different agencies, those data that are of high quality, we can do it literally with a snap of a finger. You don't have to write to them, you don't have to do all these things, right? You can just ask for a request and it comes. And you know, when we first started building the API gateway, we're not very successful. But now the API gateway has almost like nearly 3,000 data sets, and it runs like about 600 million calls a month, basically. So this is the kind of scalability that needs to happen. So all with that in mind, it really helps us a lot in dealing with the pandemic because the infrastructure was there, and the people. And I like Stefan's point, right? Last 4 years, we also spent a lot of time training about 20,000 civil servants to learn how to use data. You know, we assume that people know how to use data, but you know, Stefan's right. You need to ask the right question, right? If people don't even know how to ask the right question, then everything falls apart. And we spent literally 4 years training about 20,000 people within the public sector to learn how to solve problems using data, and very much not in a technical way, but very much in a way to understand what the problems are important and asking the right questions. So that's what we did. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, you know, it's very interesting because all the points that you mentioned, data quality, trusted centers, data sharing, the establishment of the right infrastructure and having the right skills in place are what, from the OECD perspective, we think are all key elements of the data governance. Oftentimes, data governance is only focused on one of these aspects, whereas we do think that all of them really need to be connected together. Sue, from the UK perspective, I liked very much the point you raised in your initial remarks on the relevance of the actions to maintain the delivery of services. So the question I have for you is, what are, in your view, the opportunities and challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic has presented in terms of services, and what is your strategy for considering these lessons learned in service design and delivery in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara, and interesting to follow on again, because I think some of the reflections that we have would be very similar, actually, around, we recognise what we need to build out from, shall we say. So, I mean, I think whilst we've kind of been celebrating where we have been able to kind of mobilise quickly and come together across all sectors, I think the past 6 months or so have also shone a light on, we're not there, we're on our journey, really, and the vision and how I see data kind of fitting into an overarching vision is the UK has a vision that by 2030 we want to have joined up, trusted public services, and also policies and analysis that are better driven by data, and data is a key enabling factor of that, along with digital and technology. And I'll come on at the end to where that's really starting to kind of come together as governance. And we've recently, as part of that, published a national data strategy, and one of the key missions is around government making better use of data. And I think we're quite honest in reflecting that it is a mixed bag in terms of maturity. There are some organisations who have a greater level of maturity and a greater kind of harness on the data that they hold and their ability to share and deploy that effectively. But across the system, I think we've identified four areas that we need to focus on, ranging from capability, both in terms of the kinds of experts that we need as technology continues to advance, and those decision makers, those data literate policy people. There's something also in there for us around standards and quality of data, and standardization and consistency of the way that data is held. Another thing then is around the interoperability of the systems and the ability for data to flow where it's appropriate to do so. And then the last point, really, of looking and making sure that we are deploying the legal framework that we have in the most appropriate way that we should be, and also as part of that, understanding the culture and maybe shifting some of the culture. I mentioned up front around risk appetites and consistency around that. And so the strategy's got 5 key areas of reform, as I've said, ranging from things like quality and standards through to capability. Leadership is another area that we want to focus on in the strategy, as is the debate with citizens and civil society organisations around trust and ethics. And we've started, as was in the kind of business as usual plan before the pandemic hit, we have this year launched a new data standards authority in the UK. It's a small team that I lead, but that's one of the ways that we want to look at how do we get that balance right between collaboration and learning from others, so taking the best from what different organisations across the public sector are doing, and from industry, and actually globally. And then how do we make that most effective for us from a UK government perspective? And where are some elements that we may need to start enforcing some of the standards if we are going to achieve that step change? So, and of course, the final thing is that data doesn't sit in isolation. So it is an enabler of delivering those joined up services, but we also need to recognise, I think, that the other elements that the government digital service is responsible for, so the digital and the technology, we need to have that all working hand in hand. And so there's a lot of work in parallel to the drive that we're having around data in making sure that we are improving the technology base and digital capability in order that we can achieve our strategy. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sue, leading the unit that is responsible for digital government and data. And on purpose, we put the two together. I couldn't agree more with you. I also like the fact that you underlined a couple of other things that in our view are part of the data governance, in addition to what Cheow said, which includes the standards, and how we make sure that these standards are enforced. So they're not just guiding principles, but they're actually taken up by the whole administration, because data do not sit in isolation from technology, but also different data sets cannot be isolated the one from the other. Otherwise, the whole puzzle doesn't come together. But you also brought up the issue of ethical use, of trust, and I recognize the previous comment made in relation also to the track and tracing apps, and to the fact that the trustworthy use of data collected through the apps, for instance, is a key requirement for making sure that our public keeps trusting government. So the question now obviously goes to you, Paula, in relation to your responsibility as a parliamentarian in charge of the GDPR application in France. And we all know within Europe to what extent the GDPR has been very present in all our email inboxes and conversations. So what are your thoughts regarding the protection of personal data in the current context?
Sorry, it's a very, very important issue, and yes, a lot of the debates around the tracing app in France evolved around that, because the French government chose a centralized infrastructure, and not a decentralized as it was described a couple of minutes ago, and so it makes the infrastructure more vulnerable to attacks and to leaks of private data that is very sensible data, because it's data about the health state of our citizens. So this was one of the reasons why there was not enough trust around the app in France, and why a lot of politicians were voicing against it. But this problem of securization of communications is broader than just the app during this crisis, where we have a lot of people that are home working and a lot of civil servants that are home working and that need to work online. And we have a lot of examples, for instance, in the judicial system, where the VPN was so saturated that we had court proceeding files that were attached and mailed through Gmail addresses. And this is a very important issue regarding sovereignty and regarding the control of the administration of the states on the tools that the administrations are using during this home working period. We had some efforts that were done. We have an app for a messenger app that was developed by France called Cheow, which is kind of its own WhatsApp and which is hosted in France and which was based on open source software. And but we still have only 170 users on this app, which targets civil servants, when we have 5 million civil servants in France. So we're not generating enough uptake on this kind of more securized tools that are developed by French state. And this goes also for the National Assembly, we had a lot of trouble digitalizing our work during the crisis, and for instance, we don't have a voting system online, which was developed in a lot of assemblies across the world, and so it has an impact on democratic processes, because we can't be present, but we can't express our opinions on different bills and on different political positions. This is also a topic regarding how data of citizens were used during the crisis. So we have the app, the tracing app that was developed in a lot of different countries, but it's not only about that. There's new technology that was developed and tested during the crisis. For instance, facial recognition. So there were trials to have facial recognition on the subway to recognize if people were wearing the mask or not. And so there were attempts to put this in place, but it was very contested by civil society. And we had also use of drones to control if people were getting out during without permission during the lockdown. And so all of these uses of new technology are not yet very regulated. We don't have guarantees of what can be filmed, in what specific occasion, under which judicial authorities, who is able to vision these images, etc. So I would be very careful about this use of new technologies in this context. During this week we are going to be debating about this at the National Assembly, about the use of drones. So it will be very interesting to see what is the consensus that emerges around how to regulate this use of drones and the data it can harvest during these occasions.
Thank you very much, Paula, also for bringing back the conversation on data and technology, and how, you know, because we tend to look so much at specific emerging technologies and the potential value of these technologies, but oftentimes we do not connect all the various conversations, and you know how the potential of these technologies cross paths with some of the basic rights that we need to make sure are protected, and some of the basic actions concerning discussions on regulations and how to regulate, what to regulate, and to protect which interests is extremely hot nowadays. So again, the idea of connecting the various conversations. And when we talk about collaboration, Stefan, I would like to go back to a very key point you made on the emergence of important collaborations between governments and private sectors for reusing data for public good that we've seen emerging, that you guys have seen emerging in the past 8 months. And to what extent, in your view, considering your sense of the state of the play, can we accelerate this type of collaborations whenever we see that there's a big value to actually foster them?
Great, thanks, Barbara. Yeah, so I think one of the interesting elements that have accelerated during COVID-19 is indeed how the private sector has worked with the public sector around some of their data. And so, as you know, we've been working on that topic for the last few years, which we call data collaboratives. And obviously, there is no one way of doing this. And obviously, it's also not yet a standard feature of actually public-private partnerships. And so what we've seen is indeed a lot of still experimentation, but unfortunately, a lot of those efforts are still ad hoc. They are hard to establish. I mean, it would be interesting to see Sue made reference to data sharing agreements, meaning try to come up with a data sharing agreement quite often around private sector data anyway, is actually where most of the time is spent, unfortunately. So there are a lot of barriers to make data collaboration systematic, as we call it, sustainable and responsible. And I think those are the three challenges as it relates to actually public-private partnership around data. But there are ways to make it more systematic. And one of the ways that we've looked into, in addition to, of course, what was mentioned, including the technical aspects and the infrastructure need and the policy infrastructure need, one of the elements that is missing that could accelerate data collaboration in a more systematic, sustainable, and responsible way is actually a human infrastructure that is currently absent. Too often, we get consulted by people, quite often from the government or from civil society, asking who should we talk to in corporation X with regard to their data. And then too often we have to say, good luck finding out, because there is no well-established profession, to be honest, within the private sector that can respond to solicitations around their data. And so if we would actually build the human infrastructure from the supply side, i.e. the private sector side, that would be able to respond to solicitations and really try to figure out what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, because obviously there are huge risks involved, not only privacy risk, but also reputation and corporate risks, that could figure out under what conditions can we provide access, because in most cases it's not just sharing, it's quite often just providing functional access to data, that can figure out who within the corporation needs to sign off so that you actually have coordination within the corporation, which turns out to be quite often the hardest thing to establish a data collaborative, and who could also, to a large extent, figure out how is the data ultimately going to be used so that all our efforts add up and have an impact. If you would have a designated team or a designated person that can handle this, life would be so much better with regard to data collaboratives, because it would take out a lot of the transaction costs in actually relation building that is currently effort. And so we've been calling for the creation of what we call chief data stewards, which would be a distinctive function than a chief data officer, because a chief data officer obviously has a role to play with regard to the use of data within their corporation. I think a chief data steward would actually be the external relationship builder with regard to the use of their data for other purposes in an appropriate manner, in a more systematic manner, but also a sustainable manner, because obviously there are costs involved and you have to figure out how you're actually going to recover expenses. And so in order to, and again, I'm going to put some links here to some of the work that we've done, but in order to accelerate the creation of those data stewards within the private and in the public sector, we're actually launching today a new course that will be available for free to those that have a clear mandate to build data collaboratives, which is a course on data stewardship, which focuses on the reuse of data for public interest. And this is part of our Open Data Policy Lab, which of course, where we also work with Microsoft and others in order to really accelerate the reuse of data in a systematic, sustainable, and above all, responsible manner. But absent that kind of profession, or at least a professionalization of establishing those data collaborations, it's going to be hard to scale up. And so that's why we're launching this today as well.
Thank you, Stefan. Two other key elements of the data governance that from our perspective are essential. It's having the right professions. So what kind of institutional setup you need to have in place to have the right leadership, but also to have the right professionalization of any conversation and strategic vision around data. You mentioned the work with the private sector. So I'd like to ask Julia. Julia, you've been working a lot, not only within the private sector, but also from the private sector with international organizations. We've been knowing each other for quite a few years, precisely because we've been engaging in the international environment. So in your view, how can international cooperation in the current context be strengthened and be helpful to help all governments around the world advance in the right direction?
Well, thanks, Barbara. You know, as I was listening to this fascinating discussion, I thought of two things: a book in a movie, A Tale of Two Cities and Groundhog Day. So Tale of Two Cities, because I opened with the positive note, but as I was listening to the needs that are still here and the advances that were made and trying to think about how we apply it to an international context, I really did think it's Groundhog Day. So I started my career back with the Office of the E-Envoy in 2000 in the UK, and interoperability, data collaboration, the government gateway, cross-agency collaboration was the goal, right? And it's 20 years later, Cheow, I was thrilled to hear what Singapore did 4 years ago. And I really take that as I look at the international level and all the work we still have to do. The message I have from this discussion is the need to invest ahead of the curve. Because the topic, Barbara, you and I have been talking about for over a decade now, you know, the UN as a global platform for good, right? And the need for an international global platform for the free flow, the trusted, private. I loved it, Stefan, systematic, sustainable, and responsible flow of data. If we look at the challenges that we see at the national level, and then we put it at the global level, and we look now at the global challenges we have in terms of collaborating, public, private sector, research, civil society, third society, to have a vaccine, to distribute a vaccine, to the parts of the world where it's needed most, right? Because we now know that if we can prevent outbreaks in pockets quickly, we can prevent a rapid global spread. The need for these standards, the need for the trusted flow of data has never been greater. But for all the advances we've made, I would argue we have so much more work to do. And while I started on a very positive note, I think it's because of all the work governments have done at the national level, we were able to very rapidly respond to the pandemic at a national level. I would say we have a very urgent call to action as to what needs to still be done in terms of enabling the trusted free flow of data at the global level. Now, there are things technology companies like Microsoft are doing in terms of privacy protection embedded in technology so that we can extract insights from, say, healthcare data in a trusted and private way. There are commitments we can make as the private sector. Microsoft believes that privacy is a fundamental human right. It's the foundation for trust, and trust is the foundation for the ethical use of technology, which is the foundation for using data for social good. But you know, we are one company, and I'm proud of the collaborations we have with international organizations, but I have long argued throughout my career that we need even stronger at the global level, public, private, civil society, third sector relationships, methods and modes of working, because these challenges are global, and these challenges are cross-agency, cross-industry. They impact us all as human beings. And so I have a call to action that we need to do even more together and extract the successes over the last 20 years at the national level to the global level.
Thank you, Julia. I'd like now to open the space for the interaction with the participants and I'll start by sharing the results of the poll. I don't know to what extent you'll be surprised, but the first selected answer was the need to formulate a clear strategic vision for how to leverage data as a strategic asset. The second was update the current legal and regulatory frameworks for access to and sharing of data. And the third, building sound, scalable public sector data infrastructures, for example, cloud storage, APIs, metadata, data sharing platforms, and so on. I think interesting points that connect the three different parts of the data governance that we've been discussing about, which is the vision supported by the strategy, which is the importance of having the right legal and regulatory frameworks in place, and how do we make sure that this is supported by the right data infrastructure. I'd like to actually take a question from the public, from our previous director, Rolf Alter, who's now Hertie School Senior Fellow. And the question is precisely building on the data infrastructure comment for Singapore. And the question is, how do you get buy-in for building anticipatory data infrastructure?
Yeah, you know, it's quite interesting because I spent most of my life in the private sector. And most private sector companies really don't think that far ahead, mainly because the profit motive is so important, right? You're just going to make money, period. fortunately, in Singapore, the government takes a very long-term view of investment. And when I first joined the government about 6.5 years ago, these were some of the things I kind of pitched to the cabinet. And there was a belief that the only way that Singapore is going to survive and go forward is to invest in very critical digital infrastructure, out of which data is probably one of the most important things. So we actually spend, it's back to Julia's point, right? We need to build for the future. If we don't take the investment and build for the future, and when something like this happens, like the pandemic, there's no way you can deal with it in a successful way. So I'm glad that we are very the politicians are very supportive. In fact, our Prime Minister himself is actually very involved in building the entire digital infrastructure for Singapore as we move forward. And I think getting support from the big boss himself is pretty important. And in fact, as I said, I probably brief him every month, basically on some of these critical things. So there's a firm belief that if we want to play the digital game, if we want the country to become digital by default, the forward investment is important, and the government is willing to do that, and that's the reason why I'm here. If not, I don't think I've done this job, basically. The other thing which I think is quite important is that building a data infrastructure doesn't mean an abuse of privacy or anything like that. In fact, when you build a very good data infrastructure, you're better able to manage and govern data so that the citizens can feel safer that the data are not abused or used in ways that are, well, not acceptable to them. So when we talk about the word infrastructure, the data infrastructure is a huge thing, right? It's not just technology. In fact, the governance, the policies, the ability to engage people on the street to make them realize that collection of these data are important and how it's going to benefit them, etc. There's a humongous change management involved in this. And as I said, I'm lucky in a sense that I got support from the boss, and that really helps me a lot. Over. Thank you.
Thank you. And a complementary question from always Rolf Alter that was for Paula. So Paula, why did it take a crisis to look at the use and limits of technology and data in France?
Sorry again. I think we've been working on it for a long time, but the crisis made it. We had to go to scale on a lot of different issues. For instance, regarding home working, we know that we had a lot of new platforms and services that emerged during the first lockdown that had terms and services that were terms and conditions, that were very unprotective of privacy, and people were more like attracted maybe to friendly user experience than to protect their own data. For instance, a lot of platforms that were used to make what we called apéro Skype, which is just hanging out with your friends after work online and party online, etc. And a lot of data and images and that were leaked because we had we passed a threshold on the use of the development and the diffusion of this kind of uses that were more important. And I think that also what we have in France now is the convergence of two crises, because we have the sanitary crisis, but we also have a crisis regarding the attentat, terrorist attacks in France, and which makes that the use of technology for securizing, for security in the public space is developed even further for two reasons at the same time. So for taking upon this terrorist crisis, but also for taking upon the sanitary crisis. So we have the development of all this new technology, facial recognition, drones, all kind of we can say surveillance tools that are being questioned and developed and legitimated in this context, and so there are new topics and difficulties that arise in comparison to what we were living just a couple of months ago.
Thank you. And there's a complementary question for all of you guys from Ilias Kastritis, who's from the Managing and Implementing Authority for ICT in the Ministry of Digital Governance in Greece. And the question is, he starts with the statement by saying, I think the conversation brings up very clearly the need in the current context to improve services, making the most of data and technology. But will this wave be sufficient to overcome some of the remaining problems linked to bureaucracy, being silo-based and limited infrastructure currently present in governments around the world? So I'd like to ask all of you to get this question and answer very briefly, starting with Stefan.
That's thanks, Barbara, for throwing that easy question to me. But, well, again, I think it would be a shame, let's put it that way. It would be a shame if we don't leverage the current crisis to develop a data infrastructure and especially a data strategy that can serve people and their interest moving forward. So I hope we can learn from this crisis that data is essential. Meaning, I think it's very interesting that actually data has featured as being a critical asset in the way to address COVID-19, and it's also very interesting to see that indeed government has realized that at times when there is fundamental uncertainty, right? And I think COVID-19 has created fundamental uncertainty, especially at the beginning, on what is this virus, who has it, how to deal with it. That data is a partner in actually dealing with those levels of uncertainty and then experimenting on how you actually respond through a data-driven approach. And so I hope that the crisis has proven the value of data, has proven the need to invest in an infrastructure. And then, as I said, I don't mean by that just a technical infrastructure, but also a policy infrastructure and a human infrastructure. And I hope that it also has changed the way government does business, because data is just, anyway, data is just an asset that can fuel a different way of doing government. And I think, I hope it ultimately will lead to a more agile, effective, and responsive and legitimate governance in the near future. So let's hope that this is being used wisely. Thanks, Barbara.
Julia, will this wave be enough to overcome some of these obstacles?
I'll tell you the truth. I don't think so, but I think it's going to be an important first step. And I mean that with positivity. You know, bureaucracy, silos, you know, we used to talk about data huggers when open data first came on, claiming our turf, sticking to our patch. It's human nature. It is embedded in all of us. I am running a pretty large team, and even the small little tiger teams I have, I turn around one day and the silo goes back up, I yak down another one and another one goes back up. But I think, you know, the crisis has shown us the possibility. I was talking to the head of Shared Services Canada, which I think is the largest shared service agency in the world, 250,000 people, a 3-year rollout that was planned to introduce remote working happened over a weekend because of the crisis. So we've seen the art of the possible. We've tasted the future. We're not going to put the genie back in the bottle, but we can't be naive that, you know, we've changed human nature and all those things we have come to loathe and love in our day-to-day jobs are going to go away. We just need to not let this good opportunity from the crisis go to waste.
Thank you. I think optimism needs to be complemented with realism. So I agree with you. Let's target realistic objectives in how we change the public sectors. Paula, what do you think? It's going to be enough?
So no, I think it's not going to be enough. And to be honest with you, I'm very worried because we haven't realized the importance of data, not only to manage the crisis and fight against the disease, but also, and the epidemic, but also in terms of transparency and communication and sharing information with citizens. We have this very worrying conspiracy wave in France these last weeks, these last days, with a lot of fake news that are circulating, and a lot of mistrust from society, and I'm really worried for our democracy and what will be the effect and the impact on the long run on our institutions and on the trust towards political responsibles. I think we haven't seen the first of it, and yes, so I would like to stress the importance of data, not only to manage the crisis, but also in terms of protecting our democracy. And it's very important that we have this open data, we have the information, timely information about what's happening, more so in the context of uncertainty that Stefaan was talking about.
Thank you. Cheow Hoe, will this crisis be enough?
You know, I tend to agree with Julia. I mean, the crisis has helped us. It's helped us kind of like, based on pure needs, move forward a little bit. But, you know, human instincts are there. It's always going to be there. But I think we got to make the best use of the situation we're in. And hopefully by reassuring people that what we do is actually for their good and not just for the sake of the government. People will tend to believe that this is the way forward. But will we kind of like take 2 steps forward, 1 step back? Probably. I don't think it's ever going to go away. Human instincts are going to be there, and we've got to be realistic about that. But I think this crisis has helped us a lot. And our ability to use data to help us significantly in controlling the pandemic has proven to people that data is useful, and data can actually mean a lot in terms of solving a very critical problem. So some help there, but I don't think it's going to go all the way. Over.
Thank you. And last thought on this from Sue. So do you think the crisis is going to be enough?
I think, like the others, I think it's kind of a realism about the amount of investment that we need to do, both in the UK and then globally. But I am hopeful. I think even before the pandemic really hit, we were starting to have conversations with our ministers and with senior leadership that for the first time really we're recognizing the importance of getting those foundational elements right, just as much as kind of the things that quite often cause excitement, like the mention of automation, AI, or data science. I think there was a gradual light bulb moment that in order for us to really harness the potential of data, where we should be doing that for public good and for better public services, we need to really have some investment in the foundational stuff. So I agree with what's been said. The pandemic has, through the 90 services, digital services that have been spun up, including the one that I talked about, they've shown what's possible, but equally, I think it's a road ahead that we all need to just keep invested in to really see that proper transformation.
Thank you, Sue. And before we conclude this panel, I would like to ask all of you guys to answer one question, taking maximum 1 minute, which is a question that the Observatory on Public Sector Innovation is asking all the panelists. We will gather these answers that will be included in the report that we will prepare as a subsequent deliverable of this conference to have a call for action. to be shared with all the participants in the different meetings we had around the world. And the question is the following: what are you personally committed to be doing differently in light of what has been revealed by the crisis? And I'll start by Cheow.
Yeah, I think the commitment is simple. We're just gonna keep building the data infrastructure going forward. There's no question about it. It's so important, and this crisis has kind of like made us double down in terms of getting all the agencies to work together with us, and also the civil society and private sector to do this. So we are really going big time on this. We are also bringing in the private sector significantly. In fact, we are in the process of building a national API marketplace for Singapore, and I think that's going to be important because it really helps us solve our problems going forward. So we're committed to that.
Thank you. Paula, what are you personally committed to be doing differently?
So I will keep working on building trust around the way that French institutions have responded to the crisis, but trust is a two-way street. So I would first ask the administration and the government to trust also projects and ideas that come from civil society, and of course at the level of the National Assembly, building legislation that will guarantee that citizen data is protected while these new technologies are developing to respond to the diverse crisis that we are living in France nowadays.
Thank you. Stefaan?
Thanks, Barbara. Well, I think one of the elements that the crisis has shown is that the crisis is not equal to everyone, and that we have actually, the crisis has unearthed and made even more transparent injustices in society. And so what I hope to do moving forward is to really have equity at the center of many of our efforts, because if it's good to have data provide better services, but if those services don't address the injustices and especially the inequalities that reside in society, then data has not achieved what we hope to have it achieved, is to make it work for all people, not just for those that can actually make sense of it and use it for their own benefit. And so I think equity is going to be a driving force in our work moving forward as a result of what the crisis has actually unearthed, which were systematic challenges, but clearly has become more manifest as a result of COVID-19.
Thank you. Julia?
It might seem strange coming from a large tech company, but the word that keeps coming to my mind is humanity, is to never forget the importance of the human touch. The technology is not our answer, it's a tool to bring us all together. And I think, one of the things that is, we started the conversation talking about how we've all known each other through these conferences and through these circuits, and it's great we've been able to stay together. But I am committed to make sure that as we've seen the potential of technology to replace some of the human elements, that we don't let it replace the human element, if that makes sense.
Thank you, completely agree. Sue?
Yeah, that was a brilliant point, because for me also, it's in my role, it's about that responsible innovation. So it's using data to kind of help build those better public services, but doing so in a way that we build participation into the design of that and all of the work that we're doing.
Thank you. Well, guys, I am extremely thankful for this very enriching conversation we've been having. If I have to sum up in a very non-fair way the richness of the comments that have been shared, I think some of the key ideas are around the need to keep furthering investments, strengthen collaborations, focus on trustworthy use of data, for instance, by enabling built-in engagement of the people, hoping to get the support of the big bosses and the leadership, recognizing the relevance of data is essential not only to control the pandemic, but also to protect our democracies. We need to get the foundational elements right in place. And we also need to not forget that humanity and equity are essential for responsible innovation. This went really fast, time flew. I think we were fair in balancing what went well and what we can do better. And we had a lot of fun. So I really thank all of you, and I wish you a very nice day where the day is starting and where the day is finishing.